I'm on the board of the Hingham Unity Council, and cannot tell you how happy we are to see you all here tonight. This is the third in our dinner series. I see a lot of new faces, but I also see a lot of folks who've been here for all three dinners. If you've been here for all three dinners, raise your hand. Whoa, look at that. Well, that's very validating. Welcome back, and welcome to everyone who is here for the first time. We're so happy to have you there. For those of you who don't know, the Hingham Unity Council was formed about 6 years ago. Our goal was to kind of get people out off their couches, away from their phones and social media accounts, and talk to each other in person about issues that pertain to creating a more inclusive, diverse, and welcoming community. And so that's what we've been trying to do for the last 6 years. And I do want to say that since our work is community building, I want to mention a community member who is dear to many of us who we lost this week. Rob Whitman was the husband of our dear board member, Leslie. And Rob was a beloved coach, a dedicated father, and a really good friend to a lot of us. And so I was just hoping we could just take a second here of silence to honor his memory. Okay, thank you guys. So now I'm going to introduce our amazing guests. Tonight we have Michelle Eyre interviewing Amanda Ripley. Michelle is, most of you she needs no introduction, but I'm going to tell you,
do it anyway.
Both of you who don't know her, I will give you a little background. She is a longtime resident of Hingham, a person I've known for over like 25 years, who is just one of those people who shows up, even though she has a big job and works full time, and she was still popping into the PTO events. Every time she signed up, she was there, and she was saving our bacon. So, but also just such a founder of the HUC, a board member for the past 6 years. She was recently appointed to the Hingham Human Rights Commission. And many of you may know her from her 9 years of work on the Hingham School Committee.
Thank you. Thank you.
And 3 as a chair. And so when we were talking about who we might have interview the conflict expert, we were like, they probably had some good conflict. They probably had some high conflict. And if you don't know what that means and you haven't read the book, we do have some copies, but Buttonwood was generous enough to come and sell some copies. And so, pick one up on your way out. It is a life-changing book. I found it life-changing. I have heard other people in this room say that. When we read the book, Michelle was the person who brought it to our board and said, we should be reading this. And I read it, and I was in the midst of my own high conflict. So it was extremely helpful in the moment and has been extremely helpful pretty much every day since. And so I wrote Amanda Ripley a little love letter and continued to pursue her for weeks after that, because I decided that it would be amazing if we could get her to come to our community and spread the good word. And so I finally wore her down. Amanda is amazing. She is obviously a New York Times best-selling author. She is a journalist. She is a contributor to the Washington Post, and she has started her own company, Good Conflict, which helps organizations and companies and anyone who needs help working their way productively through conflict with getting those tools. That's, I guess I think that's all I meant to say. So I'm not going to take up any more of your time. I would love to just ask you to welcome
some of the other members of the school committee. Then Carrie Nee, one of our members, got a copy for every member of the school committee to read. And it is really just a Bible for how to manage your way through conflict. And it defines sort of good conflict, bad conflict, and how we got in it, how we can get out of it. And it's really a phenomenal read. Actually, how many people have read it? I'm just curious. Okay, so a fair amount, but plenty more who hopefully will. It really is great. It's one of those books that you read and you find who you are in here, right? You sort of find like what kind of conflict person you are. Are you a conflict avoider? No. Are you a person who, can manage through conflict? It's really phenomenal. And we so appreciate you being here and sharing your insights with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here. I didn't know there was such a thing as a Unity Council. And I'm like, why don't we have millions of those everywhere all the time? But it is funny hearing you say that you're conflict avoidant and you've been on the school board for 9 years. That's like someone who's like, I hate swimming and is a lifeguard. So amazing, like for putting yourself in out of your comfort zone.
Yes, definitely.
And I suspect you've gotten much better at conflict.
I definitely have, yes. Just from the being on the school committee and being in positions of leadership, but also through this as well. This really did, it really did help me recognize that as a people pleaser, conflict avoider, you can have good conflict. Like conflict is not in itself bad. It can make people grow. It can bring you out of your comfort zone. It can make you understand other people's perspectives. So there is good conflict, there's high conflict. And it's just, it's a great guide on how to keep with the good conflict and how to avoid the high conflict. I was thinking about this. Can you talk to us about your journey? How did you get to writing this book? Was it any one thing? Was it just seeing the divisiveness out there?
Yeah, so I'm curious what people in this room remember as their very first conflict memory. If you really think back, what's the first conflict you remember? Most of us, it's probably with your parents or maybe a siblings, yeah, or other kids on the playground, right? Okay. But early on, we come up with some coping tactics for surviving that, right? In my case, there was a lot of conflict in my home, and I, for some reason, got into my head that I would monitor the conflict. I would keep an eye on it. And somehow it felt like that would keep me safe. I don't know why I thought this. It's magical power thinking. Yeah. But I would sit at the top of the stairs and listen to my parents fight. Whereas my brother, 3 years older, would leave at the first sign of trouble and go play with his Star Wars action figures in the woods behind the house, right? Which I think is probably a better idea when you're a kid. You're looking back on it. But I'm curious, how many people would say as a kid, their kind of go-to move in conflict was to avoid, which is very, very common. And by the way, not a bad survival technique. So yeah. And then how many people would say their go-to move was to fight back? Or all right, we got quite a few fighters in the room. All right. That's good too. I mean, we need that too. Yeah. These are all valid options, right? Depending on the context. And is there any monitors out there like me? Any okay. And then I was about to say, then we have our mediators, people who kind of help keep the peace. And sometimes we have comedians who distract from the conflict. Yeah, that's a good technique too. Yeah. Solver. We go okay, let's fix this. Let's sit down and hash this out. Yeah. Yeah. So all of those are good things, but it is interesting to just reflect on, have you built out your portfolio of other options as you've gotten older, because it's easy to just default to that. But anyway, as I got older, I found out you could get paid to monitor conflict, which is basically what journalists do. And so I was like, oh, this is great. And so again, all subconsciously, I thought that by covering really terrible things, I covered terrorism and crime and education, which was by far the most controversial, that by covering it, I was somehow protected, that I was going to be able to predict what would happen next, which, at a certain point just broke down. I mean, around 2016, coincidentally, I started to feel like, wow, this conflict isn't making sense anymore. And journalism isn't functioning the way it's supposed to function. Because, I was at Time Magazine for 10 years. I was at The Atlantic. I was at The Post. And the places I was writing for were not trusted by huge parts of the country. So it's like, what are we even doing? Do we just keep doing the same thing, only with more righteous conviction? Sort of
I think
what's
we tried
happened.
that, it did not end well.
Yeah, exactly. So I sort of went through this mid-career crisis, to finally answer your question, and started following people who understood conflict really intimately to see what I had missed. And it turned out a lot. I'll never forget talking to this conflict mediator who had been a journalist on Capitol Hill before. And I asked her, what would you do differently if you went back to journalism? And she said, I would go much deeper into conflict. And I was surprised by that, because people are always complaining that all we do is cover conflict. And she said, no, journalists just hover around the edges like a moth to a flame, but they never get into the most useful, interesting part of the conflict. And then I was like, oh, that's interesting. So the book ended up being about the stories of people and communities that are really bewitched by high conflict, which we can talk about what that is, and then how they got out, right? Because part of the problem, I think, with traditional journalism is there's not enough rigorous coverage of people's attempts to solve problems, right? There's just coverage of the problems. So the book is just as much focused on how you get out as a community or as an individual of dysfunctional conflict and into functional conflict. Because as you said, the goal is not no conflict. The goal is conflict that makes us stronger.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. It's interesting. When I read the book, Gary resonated the most with me, because if for those who haven't read, I'll give you this snippet. Gary is a mediator for a living. And he decides that he's going to run for public office in his beautiful bucolic town on the West Coast.
Yeah, it's sort of like a West Coast version of this.
Kind of like West Coast. Yes. So I was like, oh, this is really interesting. And he thought he was going to be great at this job. He was going to be so good at this job, because his job was literally to solve problems and meet people in the middle and get two sides.
He is one of the world's leading experts on conflict mediation. I mean,
yes, that's literally his job.
Literally.
And so he runs for this office and he wins, and he is awful at it. He is so bad at it. He is the biggest conflict entrepreneur out there. He's just like drama's just finding him. He's creating drama. He's fighting with everyone. He thinks he's doing all these great things, and he is not. And anyway, so it's just a great snippet from the story. And I won't spoil it for those who haven't read it, but he has an interesting journey of getting out of it. But I wondered, were there any particular people, I'm saying characters like it's a novel, but were there any in this book that, I don't want to say favorites because you can't have a favorite, but anyone that really resonated with you?
Well, Gary is an interesting story, because the way I met Gary is when I was going around interviewing all these conflict experts and mediators and people who understand how the brain operates in conflict. I would ask each of them at the end of the interview, what's the best mediation training you've ever gotten? Because I was like, that would be fun to go get some training, but I want to go to the best, obviously. So a couple people said this guy, Gary Friedman in California. So I call him up to interview him. And sometimes you just know in the first 10 minutes that this person is something special. Like, he just had a way of being like a little bit vulnerable, but also knew a lot. And it was an incredible interview. And so at the end I said, could I get some mediation training with you? And he said, well, it just turns out we're doing a 40-hour training in Mexico in 3 weeks, and we have one spot left. Which to this day, I sort of wonder, like, did you really only have one spot left? But it's a genius move to say to a reporter. And so I was like, really? And anyway, at the time, this project was funded by the Solutions Journalism Network, which is an incredible nonprofit that you should check out if you don't know about it already. And my editor there, I called him and said, hey, could I go to Mexico and take a week-long conflict mediation training? And he was like, I swear to you, I mean, I almost couldn't get it out of my mouth, like with a straight face, because it was such an absurd request. And David Bornstein, who's an amazing journalist, was like, yeah, okay. And this experience totally transformed my life. And Gary's an incredible teacher, as are his colleagues. And during this week, at some point, he revealed that he had recently run for office. And as he put it, it took him about an eighth of a second before he got caught in the very same kind of conflict that he had spent 40 years helping other people get out of. So I thought, well, that isn't, let's put a pin in that. And then I'm going to come back. And so I ended up writing about him and following him through that. So in some ways that, that was the kind of my gateway drug to the whole book. So that was very special. And I'm very grateful to Gary for, I mean, think about what it must feel like, right? To take 40 years of work and reveal that you yourself could not do the thing at first. So it was incredibly courageous, I thought, of him to do it.
Yeah, no, it was just the fact that he shared the story, I think, was courageous and vulnerable. And it made me feel better because I thought, okay, like when you think you're really good at something, you may be good at it for other people, but not so much for yourself, right? So he was great at helping other people solve their problems. But when he was the problem, he had a much harder time with it. Some of the other folks in the book are just so inspiring. And now I'm going to forget his name, but
Curtis.
Yes, Curtis. Yes. Can you talk a little bit about Curtis? This is great.
So the book kind of we start small with like this novice politician, Gary, and, it's sort of a little more accessible for your average reader. And then you kind of get into darker and more difficult, bigger conflict, right? So after Gary, I talk about Curtis Toller, who was a fairly high-ranking gang leader on the south side of Chicago for many years. And really fascinating story. Another person who is incredibly courageous in telling his story. And now he does gang violence interruption for Chicago Cred, which is probably the most sophisticated gang violence interruption program that I know of. And they have learned a ton about conflict, and especially group conflict, right? And violent conflict. But Curtis's case, the story, if I were to sort of give you the short version, is that when he was about 12 or 13, he saw someone shooting baskets in the playground near in Foster Park in Chicago. Anyone from Chicago here? Okay, all right. And he thought, oh my God, is that guy an NBA player? Because there was something about this guy's grace that just looked different. Mm-hmm. And this girl next to him, a whole bunch of kids were watching, she said, no, that's Benji Wilson. And he came to find out that Benji Wilson was a high school player in Chicago who was ranked #1 in the country at the time and had, he could go anywhere he wanted, basically. He was an incredible player. And at the time he had his baseball hat on sideways, which was a signal in Curtis's mind and other people's mind for being a member of a particular organization, which was Curtis's gang. So now on multiple levels, Curtis is feeling a connection with this young man. And it feels like every time Benji wins a game, he wins a game. Because that's how humans are with collective suffering and collective winning. So one day he's watching the news with his grandfather, Curtis is, and he sees on the news that Benji Wilson has been shot. He was outside his high school at lunch, talking to his girlfriend, and he was shot by another kid who was now wanted. And Curtis felt like he just couldn't breathe. Like, how could this be happening?
Right.
Why him was what kept going through his mind. And then he heard who had done it, which was another teenager named Billy Moore, who was part of a rival organization, rival gang. So all of a sudden it clicked for Curtis, right? Like, clearly this gang was trying to destroy his gang by taking out the most valuable talent. And so he spent the next, give or take 10 years of his life trying to right that wrong, among other things. Mm-hmm. Now, Billy Moore, the shooter in this case, was immediately arrested and put away for 20 years. So he couldn't actually kill Billy because Billy was in prison. So he found other people, right, from that same organization. So this is a kind of classic story of group collective conflict. And there's a lot of reasons why humans act this way, right? But one of them is we all want to matter. And Curtis wanted to matter. And this is a way to matter, right? To belong to this organization, to have someone like that in the organization, or he perceived him to be in the organization. And then when that's taken from you, it's devastating. So one of the 4 key drivers of dysfunctional or high conflict is humiliation, which is when you or your group, you think you're up on high and you're brought low, especially publicly. That's probably driving every single difficult conflict any of us have ever seen. If you listen to Putin's speech before the invasion of Ukraine, it's laced through with allegations of humiliation. 70% roughly of gang violence today starts on social media because of something that is disrespectful or humiliating. So this is the thing that's driving this conflict. But like, how often do we talk about it? How often do we talk about humiliation? I mean, when we train journalists now at Good Conflict, we say, you should have a humiliation and dignity beat. Like, that's what you should be covering. Don't just keep covering the surface of the conflict. So anyway, in Curtis's case, many, many things happen. And incredibly, he reaches a saturation point, which happens to a lot of people in high conflict. But in his case, he actually does exit the conflict. He decides it's no longer worth the cost. And one day he runs into Billy Moore, who's now been released from prison. And at this point, they are both working on the same side, trying to interrupt gang violence. And Curtis says to him, "Man, I wanted to kill you." And Billy says, "You're not the first." Because remember, all of Chicago hated this guy. And he said, "Can I tell you what happened?" And they talked for hours. And what happened was Billy was walking somewhere, and Benji, the basketball star, bumped into him, kind of shoved him out of the way. And Billy was embarrassed because there were girls around watching. And Billy happened to have a gun that he'd stolen from a relative for other reasons. So he took the gun out. And next thing you know, he made the worst mistake of his life and killed this basketball star. He didn't even know who that was, but had nothing to do with their gang identities. In fact, Benji was not even in a gang, as far as we know. So all of this was in Curtis's head. And one of the interesting things about high conflict is how much of it exists in our heads, right? We have a whole storyline, only some of which is true. So in Curtis's case, he was able to find out how much of it was not true. And it was an incredible moment, like when you realize that.
Yeah, it's very moving in the book. It's a very moving moment when Curtis realizes that all this time he had built up this big villain in his head who was a rival gang member and all the things. And then he was embarrassed. And
which is how most shootings happen in the United States, by the way. It's like people get upset and they have a gun. That's most shootings. Yeah.
That is fascinating. Feels like there's a way you can minimize that risk, but I'm not sure.
It's going to happen. I think it's fair to say. So what then? Well, I think, and you'll tell me, I know this sounds naive, but I actually think we have to have the best conflict skills in the world. If you're going to have that many guns around, you got to know how to fight. Like, you got to have the skills to regulate emotion. You got to know how to interrupt violence. And you got to have it down so you can do it under stress. I don't know another way. But I think given where we're at, having more conflict fluency is probably our best option.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. It's interesting because what you were just saying about, we have to teach people these conflict skills. And I'm thinking about young children and students and the violence we see in schools. And you do a fair amount of work with educators as well. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? Because I think it's fascinating. We have some educators in the room here.
Yeah, how many people are currently or previously worked in education? Wow, that's amazing. So yeah, you know better than I that education brings up a lot of deep emotion, right? A lot of values, a lot of fears. And so it was polarized before polarization was cool, right? Like there have been significant conflicts in education for a very long time. We at Good Conflict, our biggest, the biggest customer we have, the number by number is school superintendents, like people who come to us and want help. Just saying quickly, just saying. Right there. Talk to the point that it's actually amazing because we have learned so much from school superintendents. I mean, because they have figured out, like every school superintendent has a playbook, am I right, for how to deal with conflict. And there's like incredible wisdom in those playbooks. I was just talking to a superintendent in Texas who told me, he gave me a whole thing, which I had in the middle of it. I'm like, can I just take out my phone and record what you're saying? Because I cannot. A whole thing about how you arrange the furniture in your office for managing conflict. So he had this thing where he would, if a parent came in and was upset, he'd come out from behind his desk and go sit in this like living room area of the office with couches. And so you're sitting like, next to them, not across the table from them, which is a kind of classic de-escalation move. But a lot of these things they've tried and figured out, so that's been one of the joys of this work, is trying to collect those stories and hacks and help more people understand them, to the point where, we got to a point where we can't respond to all the requests. So this summer, we're doing a special Good Conflict Masterclass for educators, which I'm happy to share with you down the line if you want. But we learned so much from these folks, and they have so much that they need help with. So we'll be doing a kind of live 6-week course with these folks this summer, because nobody was trained for this. And in every high conflict, all around the world. So the third story in the book is about Colombia and former FARC guerrilla fighter who left the conflict there, the Civil War. But in every high conflict around the world, guess who suffers the most? It's always kids.
Yeah.
And the phrase high conflict comes from high conflict divorce, which is a divorce that's stuck in repeating patterns of blame and hostility. In the United States, lawyers noticed in the 1980s that about a quarter of divorces were high conflict, and they were just stuck. And it's an awful lot of pain is generated by a high conflict like that. But it's always the kids who suffer the most.
You talk about this in the book, and I think it would be great to share with the folks is the tools to get out of the high conflict, right? Because once you're in it, it is hard to get out of it, right? You just get mired in your opinion and the polarization of it. I'm on the right side, you're on the wrong side. And I don't know that there's always a way out of it, right? There's not always. Sometimes it's like, you just got to say, I give up, fine. We don't need to speak anymore. I think that's happening, unfortunately, a lot in this country these days. But what are the tools that you have found are the most effective in trying to get from high conflict to good conflict?
Yeah, that was the whole mystery of the book, is like, what, and I'm just trying to gather clues, and from the research and from these stories, like, what did you all do first, second, and third, and do any of those sync up? And are there things that the rest of us could learn from that? So let's go back to Curtis. Like in his case, the first thing he did, well, first of all, you have to reach a point where you're open to getting out of the conflict. Mm-hmm. And so this is a really important moment. And a lot of people reach that saturation point and they try to leave, and then they go back, because it's extremely lonely to leave high conflict. I talk in the book about Glenn Beck, who made a real effort to leave high conflict and ended up, to the best I can tell, going back. So, he kind of zigzags a little bit, but like, it's really hard to leave because all of your people are in the high conflict and they want you to be too, by that point. So in Curtis's case, he literally moved across town to a different apartment, which was very fortunate. So that he didn't have to hear immediately about each new atrocity that had been committed against his side, which would then require some kind of revenge, right? So it distanced him not just from the conflict, which is super important, but from the conflict entrepreneurs in the conflict. And reward them, including journalism, including social media, including politics. So we don't have to design things that way. I don't think we always will, but that's where we're at right now. So part of the recipe for getting out is definitely turning down the volume on conflict entrepreneurs in your life, in your media feed. In high conflict divorces, there's always conflict entrepreneurs in the midst. Sometimes it's the lawyer, sometimes it's the sister-in-law. I mean, it's different people, but noticing that is step one. Right? Like, who seems to delight in every twist and turn the conflict takes? And just as it starts to simmer down, who brings it right back up again? Right? And now also remembering that we all can be conflict entrepreneurs, right? So every day I just wake up and try not to be one. It's so tempting, you know? You get a lot of rewards for it. So that's sort of the first thing. And I'll pause there but there's more we could say, right? But that's the first thing, yeah.
No, it is. I think the recognizing who you're talking with, you know, are they a conflict entrepreneur? Are they a fire starter? What's there? And all these terms are in the book. But, you know, sort of who is the audience or who is the person that you're talking to? And then finding ways to try to move past that. And it's interesting, I think twice now, the sort of physicality has come up, like Curtis moved, you know, the superintendent office, you know, changed the furniture around. And it is interesting thinking about that. Sometimes just resetting the table, right? Moving things around, sitting on the other side of the table, right? Maybe you're, thinking back to negotiations. We used to do the negotiations when we were negotiating the school contracts. We would do them at town hall. And then we all sort of thought, maybe we should be doing this one in about making space.
Yeah. And there's we call it the low hanging fruit of, like, if you're gonna like be in a situation that might involve any conflict, or you just want to build conflict resilience into a community, there's just a bunch of things that you do. And the research on this is super clear. And they're pretty obvious, but I will tell you, I go to a lot of events where none of these things are happening. So I would love to see if you all can guess, because several of them happened here tonight already. What are the things that are just low-hanging fruit that help people have better conflict? Food.
Yes.
Duh. Round tables. Yes. Music. Who said music? Yes. Music. Wine.
I can go sometimes the other way.
Icebreakers. Yeah. Conversation. Yeah. Name tags are good. Right? Because then you're not like, oh God, I know your name. What is it? And you're not like super awkward trying to figure it out.
Games.
Games is a great one. Yeah, sports has always been actually like one of the key ways to pull people out of even really violent conflict all around the world. Soccer is a big one for that. But so bravo, Katie. Very well done. You're doing a lot of the things. I mean, I'm telling you, like, it is amazing how often people don't. You know, there's a reason there's like, you know, since forever, there's like singing in church and then like donuts and coffee in the basement. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's not just by coincidence. So those are some of the things. And also with physicality, there's some really cool research on how literally movement is helpful for people who are in a difficult conversation, like going on a walk together. I know it sounds corny, but like if you can suggest like a walk, it's better than just, you know, staring at each other. And also, who thinks it's a good idea to have conflict over text messaging? Okay.
What goes wrong there?
Yeah. Is there an upside to that? Can you, Sarah, what the upside might be?
Yeah. So a little bit about me first off before I answer this.
Yeah.
I was at Tufts University and I studied conflict resolution for 4 semesters.
Awesome.
And so we learned that sometimes like negotiations or conflict that sometimes happen over text or email can actually be, for certain people in certain situations, more advantageous because you're getting rid of, if there is a tone, like biting it back a little bit, and you're also creating a like paper chain, so to speak, to memorize exactly who said what. So there's ever confusion, you always have something to refer to. Obviously, we know though, in the advent of like, needing to respond to emotions, it can also have downsides.
Yeah, right. I think that's a really good point. I mean, I think a lot of people my age are quick to just say that like you should never have conflict over text. And I've finally been convinced that like that's just not realistic. That like so much of our communication is now over text that there's going to be difficult conversations over text. And to your point, there is a way in which you can, I mean, there's this hunter in Finland that I talk to every so often he tries to do a lot of conflict de-escalation with animal rights activists who confront him on Twitter. And it's helpful to him to have that time to like, he'll like take what he's going to say back and share it with other people and see if it's constructive. And so, yeah, I think, one time out of 10,000, it's
how polarization has actually been around for a very long time. I shared this anecdote with Amanda earlier that I was talking to my brother, who's a few years, maybe a lot of years older than I am. And we were talking about, I was saying like, just the country is so divisive right now. And I've never seen this in my lifetime. And how do we get out of it and all the things? And he said, I don't know. He goes, I mean, you were too little in the 70s, but the 70s were no picnic either, right? He was like, I mean, there were war protests, the Democratic Convention in Chicago. He was like, all the things, like there was a lot going on in the 70s. Like there was a lot of dissension. There was a lot of divisiveness. He was like, and we got through it. But we talked a little bit though about how, at least for me, it feels like so much of this today is perpetuated by the algorithms in the social media, and that we're just sort of fed, we're all in our little bubbles, right? We were talking, I remember so vividly being so shocked at the results of the 2016 election. And as I was driving into work a couple of days later, I thought to myself, yeah, maybe it's me, because I realized like I live in Massachusetts in a blue town, in a blue state, and I drive to work every day by myself, listening to NPR. And, I go to work and we don't really talk about politics because it's not really the thing you do. And so I thought to myself, I'm like, wow, there is so much else out there that we're not hearing from or listening to. And while it's really hard to put yourself out there and want to listen to the other side, I think it is so important. And I think you've talked about that a lot in your book. And there's a lot of research on this about how the polarization happens and how you can break out of it. Do you want to share?
Yeah, and we were talking a little bit about Esther Perel. Has anyone ever listened to her podcast? She's a psychologist and really interesting character, author. So she said this thing the other day where she said, polarization is conflict avoidance, which really struck me because I always think of polarization as like all the conflict all the time. But actually, she's right. Like it is, we pull into our separate corners. When that side does something crazy, then we have to do the opposite, right? And then you don't really talk. You don't want to talk. You feel like you don't need to talk. You know what they're going to say, right? You think you do. And so it is a way to avoid conflict. And it reminds me of this woman who works on bringing Israelis and Palestinians together in Jerusalem and has done so for many, many years. She was saying how she regularly goes to the protests that were happening in Israel every weekend. And she said, yeah, it makes me feel good. But at the end of the day, I think it's also work avoidance. And I thought it was such an interesting phrase. I was like, wait, what do you mean? And she said, well, protest is good. It does some things, but it doesn't do a lot of things. It's at the end of the day, you need relationships. Like, you need to understand each other's language. You need to understand what other people really care about underneath everything. So then you can seize opportunities when they arise. And unfortunately, separation doesn't get us there. Separation is just, in some ways, a way of being frozen in the conflict.
Yeah, no, it's very true. And I think one thing that maybe other folks in this room struggle with is with the polarization and the divisiveness when it's your family members, right, that you cannot avoid because it is Thanksgiving and we must get together, or it's another holiday. And what do you do with that, right? To just ignore the elephant in the room, and you're just like, all right, absolutely no talk about whatever the topic is that makes the family so divisive or so divided. And is that new? Like, did we just grow up not talking about politics? Like, because I was thinking about my family, and I thought it is interesting because my parents definitely have very different political views than I do, and all of my siblings. So I'm one of 6, and I'm like, and the 6 siblings all sort of share the same political views, but our parents do not. And I'm like, how did that happen? So do you have tips for that, ideas for that? Do you just not address the elephant? Do you try to
I think it's like all of the above, right? Like, sometimes you want to not address politics. The relationship needs to survive if at all possible. Because what I've learned is people do change. And you change, I change, they change. And if there's a moment where they are more flexible in their thinking, or you are, if there's no one around they can talk to, they're not going to change. So it's kind of like you want to stay in relationship if you can, and sometimes you can't. But depends on the person, depends on the situation, depends on how important that relationship is. So sometimes, it's not worth letting politics invade everything. There's a Venezuelan journalist named Victor Febre who I've interviewed because it's really helpful to talk to people who've worked in countries that were more polarized than we were earlier, but they've already been down this path, right? And Venezuela is a great example. Where Hugo Chavez was elected, the elites were sort of shocked and appalled, and the traditional sort of elite media just, doubled down on righteous conviction and couldn't believe that, this person had been elected. And then, his cabinet members were mocked at restaurants, and a lot of these same things happened many years before that happened in the United States. And he's just watching this whole thing happen and like, oh my God, you guys are making it worse. Like, you don't even know. And so what he said is, don't let politics invade everything. Like, politics don't belong in everything. And we are being used. We are being played. Every single one of us. Every friendship that's lost, every family member that's severed. We are being played. Because those divisions are real. I'm not saying they're not. There are important fights that need to be had in this country that we aren't having because we're having a bunch of nonsense fights. But who's winning? Who's winning? Just ask that question. Because a lot of people are hurting. And we're being turned against each other without even knowing each other. So it's a very complicated question. I haven't done it justice. The last thing I'd say is there's a great podcast host named Monica Guzman who talks about this exact question. And her parents are both immigrated to the United States from Mexico. And she is very much on the left and they're very much on the right. And they talk about their tension. And have talked on a show that I hosted. They talk on her show. And so she has really good advice. And she has a great book out about this that I would recommend.
No, that's great. I think it is interesting because when you do think about being played, and there's so many people being hurt right now, but we're just constantly bombarded with the headlines and the next egregious story. And it's so hard to turn away from it. And I've been trying to make a concerted effort to be like, you know what, this is a strategy, right? They're flooding the swamp, throw it all out there, it's whack-a-mole, right? Like, keep the people so they don't know what they're outraged about today, and sort of find that one or two things that really matter to you or someone you love and that you want to fix, and just try to focus. I mean, I'm not saying don't read the news, but try to focus on those news stories to keep informed, but to also figure out a way that you can help those people stop hurting and be really productive in what you're doing. Because I think that's going to be important as we move forward as, you know, a community, as a country. And it's a scary time. And I think I also try to stay off social media as much as I can. What do you think? What are your thoughts on the role of social media in all of this? Am I the person in the room who's like, it's like, I'd like to see a world where we can get away from it, but is that ship has sailed? We're never going to get away from it, and we just have to learn how to use it productively.
I would say no to both of those. Like, I do not. Okay, I don't think we're going to get away from it.
Okay.
But I don't think we just have to learn to live with and, like, you know, just set up a lot of, like, you know, time limits and parental controls. Like, I do not think that's a good solution. These platforms were designed to do this. At first, they didn't know that. I don't think it was intentional, but now we know. And you could literally overnight flip a switch and change the algorithms on all of these platforms. I mean, there are algorithms already developed and tested that would actually promote pro-social content, right? Because what you're seeing is not what's in your feed, right? You know that, everyone knows that. It's not a chronology, like pretty much in most places. Like, it's, you know, it's generating outrage and anger, and because that just gets more attention. That's how we're wired, right? So the design of these things really matters. And we have not been served by the design. But I don't think it will always be that way. I think there will eventually be enough demand for something else, and hopefully one day some regulation around it. But I think at this point, we don't have as many good options as we should have.
Yeah. It's the algorithm piece of it is tough. One thing on the Unity Council, when we put posts up, we turn off the comments because things could go sideways depending on what you're doing. But the problem is when you turn off comments, it doesn't get boosted in people's feeds. Right. So it's sort of like you're trying to get the good word out there, but you can't get the good word out there because there are bad words in there that are keeping the good words away. So it's a little bit of a vicious cycle. But if there are ways to fix that, so hopefully maybe we can get some regulation around that to get there. Without spoiling any sequel that may be coming out to this book, are there any updates on any of the folks in this book that you could share or that might be of interest to folks?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm in good touch with everyone in the book. I don't want to go on. I feel like I've talked a lot. I want to make sure we have time for the table conversation. So, but I guess I would say that Gary finished out his term and is doing great. And he, you know, I shared the book with everyone in the book before it came out, but he was nervous when the book came out. And then nothing happened. He was like, okay, I'm fine. And then Politico magazine did an excerpt just about Gary, just that part. And all of a sudden he got a lot of responses from people he hadn't talked to in years, from all around the world that he trained. But here's the weird thing. He called me up, he said, Amanda, the more I show I failed, the more people love me. And it is actually we now train leaders on this, that you want to show 10% vulnerability, like show that you're a human, especially in conflict, because it's harder to dehumanize someone who is human. So anyway, there was a lesson in there for all of us, but I worked out all right for Gary, thank God.
Oh, good. I know that Gary resonated with me, so that's good to know. How are we doing for time? What? 8:20. Okay. Oh, sorry. So we did go a little over. Sorry. You're very engaging to speak with. So hopefully it was engaging for everyone here too. All right. So I think we're going to take a little break, 10 minutes.
Yeah. So you want to hold up one of those cards so we can see what we're talking about. There's these icebreakers. It's the blue one. The blue one. Okay. And you can choose which one you want to answer. You sort of talk amongst yourselves, and then we'll ask you what came up.
Yeah, and then we'll be back. All right, thank you, everybody. I hope everybody enjoyed that. You're a very engaging audience. It was really a pleasure to be up here and have the, again, honor to chat with Amanda in front of all you lovely people. Just one thing, when we'll have some more conversation now, either Amanda or I will sort of repeat back what you commented or what your question was, just for Harvard Media purposes. the audience who will watch this recording at some point later will hear what the question or comment was. So I'm not sure how to do this. The icebreakers, was that a good activity for folks? Did they? Yeah. All right, good. We didn't do that at the other dinners. But I think it was a great idea. As a matter of fact, I think it was your suggestion.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm curious if any interesting things come up at those table conversations that anyone wants to share. Yeah.
I would mention about halfway.
Yeah.
But what I found is for both conversations, in those conversations, you find out not your opinions, but your values are different. It's really hard to get past the fact that at the most fundamental level, you were seeing a side of people that you did not know exist. And you wonder, are those relationships even worth saving? Because you just see the world so differently at a most fundamental basic value.
So you're saying sometimes it's not just that you have differences of opinion, it's that your deeper values are so different that you're not sure it's even worth having the relationship. Is that right?
And you're just finding it out.
And you're just finding it out in the conversation.
And it's very disturbing because I have just recently kind of broken a relationship with someone who, when I realized that that's what you think, our values are so basically different. I don't even know if we're not really friends anymore.
Because you feel like you don't have enough in common at a sort of deep foundational level. Yeah. 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 That can
I
happen.
think this environment really sort of starts to show.
I mean, I guess I don't know. I mean, I hear what you're saying. It surfaces some deep fissures, right, between people. And sometimes if you're willing to go down and figure out what those fissures are, it can be very distancing, right, to realize. On the other hand, I don't think that it's like there are these people and those people, and now we're figuring out who they are. Like, I don't think it's that essentialist. I think most people are many things, right? I think one of the interesting things that Esther Perel was also saying is that the reason polarization is conflict avoidance, and she sees it in couples that she's doing therapy with, is that they stop being curious about each other, right? So they assume they know what's in the other person's heart. And that's always very dangerous, because people are more than one thing.
But there also could be one thing, the red line. If I find out somebody's racist, that's it.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't know a person in this world who's not racist.
How can you give them
I don't know. I mean, this is the problem. There's not these bright lines of like racist, not racist, not like
Locally and saying things.
Yeah. But here's the problem. No one's ever become less racist from other people stop talking to them. Do you know what I mean? Like, it may not be that you're the right person to talk to them, but someone's got to talk to them, right? Like, this is in the world. And there's only one way.
But for my own mental health, I like avoidance.
Okay. I think that's fair. And I'm going to say that into the mic so we can capture that for posterity. For my own mental health, I like avoidance. Okay. And it's not for everyone, right? It's not for everyone. But I'm just saying, if you want less racism, not talking is not going to get us there. Right. Yeah.
There was, I can't remember the names, but there was an incredible story I read about a black man who went to meet like a grand whatever it is of the KKK.
Yeah, you're talking about Daryl Davis.
And they became best friends.
Yeah, Daryl Davis is an unusual individual. I don't think most people could do what he did. But it's right, he went around talking and building relationship with Klan leaders, and one by one, they gave up their robes, and he has this crazy collection of robes. There's a documentary about him if anyone is interested. But yeah, I mean, he's got a special gift, right? Like that's an unusual cat right there.
The point of the ice breaking of where if one were to say, well, that person's a racist, therefore I will not speak to them.
I see, yeah.
it's just the opposite, that that person's a racist, maybe we can find common ground somewhere else and dissolve that barrier.
Yeah, it's hard work, right? But yeah, there's so to repeat what you said, it's basically like if there's a way to build connection, then there's an opportunity.
Question, yeah. So I kind of want some advice for how we're supposed to lead as a young person, how we're supposed to lead the new generation and also have intergenerational teaching for those who might be more senior to us. And I want to know, how do we be brave in facing that pushback and in facing there was sometimes reluctance that's often comes with both advocacy and being mediators?
It's a big question. So I'm not going to be able to repeat it all, but I feel like you're asking about multi-generational, how do we build relationship and understanding across generations? Is that one question?
Partly. And then how do we also have like courage and courage and ambition and humility, I guess, all encompassing when we do that approach?
Yeah. How do we do that and build courage and humility in doing it? I mean, I think, look, I don't have all the answers, obviously, but I think these are good questions to be asking. One thing I know for sure is that there are now 5 generations working in the workplace together. That's unprecedented. And a lot of the conflict that we see in my work is intergenerational conflict. So I'm glad you're bringing that up. I work with U.S. Senate Chiefs of Staff and House Chiefs of Staff and members of Congress. And I used to go into those conversations thinking we were just going to talk about the political polarization. Duh. But no, you know what they want to talk about? The generational conflict on their staffs.
Interesting.
So there's this big roiling problem in the country, but like day to day, what they're dealing with is like their younger employees not wanting to come back in the office or stuff like that, right? So like this is a huge source of conflict, and again requires, I think, to answer the second part and maybe harder part of your question about how do we do that with humility and courage. My best answer to this, and it might be unsatisfying, but all the research shows we have got to put on our reps. Like we do not have enough experience practicing good, healthy conflict. And we just cannot get better at it until we have more of it in a low stakes setting, right? So that's a lot of what we do in our workshops now is try to train people to have easier, healthier, lower level conflict all the time. So it's almost like you delight in it in a healthy way. So when someone says something and you're like, really? Oh my God, that's so interesting. I had no idea that you thought that, right? As opposed to being like horrified, right? Or wanting to leave the room. And it is a skill that you can get better at. Like I'm still trying, I'll be trying till the day I die to get better at it. But I'm not always good at it, but I have seen people get better at it in front of my eyes. But it requires practice in a low stakes setting.
So would a good example of a low stakes settings would be like when I was being a teaching assistant at the university, I facilitated simulations of conflict.
Oh, great. Yeah, simulations are great. We did role play scenarios with superintendents. For example, building up those role play scenarios and simulations, the more realistic, the better. I mean, I'll tell you, I played the superintendent in one of them, and it was like the parent came in, the superintendent played the parent. Oh my God. This was like some Oscar award-winning act. I was like, holy moly. It was hard. But yes, simulations are great, but also just low-level stuff. So instead of avoiding it, I'll give you an example. There was somebody we've been working with that there's been some friction. I'm not sure what's going on. And I was just doing the thing that most of us do, which is avoiding it. But then I remember, the more I do this, the better and easier it's going to get. So I tried to have coffee with this person and be like, what's going on here? I'm really curious. I'm really trying to get curious and ask a bunch of questions and prepare for that. You have to prepare. You can't don't wing it. Do not wing it. So it's this small conflict. It's not a big one, right? But it's the more you do that, the more muscle memory you develop around it. So it gets easier and easier.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think we had a question back here, yeah.
Okay, so I'm not the most articulate person in the world, and I
Me neither.
so welcome to my TED Talk. I just hearing the stories tonight and listening to you and the gangs and the algorithms and like all of that, I just think it's like human nature to gravitate towards the pack. So I feel like people gravitate towards gangs because it's something they fit into. This is probably very obvious to everyone. Same thing with the algorithms. When you get hit with an algorithm on your social media, you're like, oh my God, yes, this is me. Like, they know.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, you can say like, I'm gonna win $1 million tonight.
Yeah.
Hopefully it happens. And then just, I forget where my point is going because I get nervous. But like, even at work, right? Work scenarios, like people tend to gravitate towards people who agree with them,
Yeah.
have the same kind of like mindset and opinions. And it really does take that one person to be like, actually, this is how I think about the situation, to help the gang be like, oh,
Huh.
like
Huh.
you, like you're right, like that sounds good. But I think like just as humans in general, like even going down that road and saying, okay, yes, I agree with that. I think this might be a fun thing to try. Then that maybe creates like another path, like not a game so much as a violent game, but like a new path for people to kind of like hopefully grow and experience something different. And like,
Let me see if I'm understanding what you're saying. You tell me when I miss. Wait. Let me.
No.
Seriously. So this is a technique we teach called looping for understanding, and this is something that again you need to learn to do on automatic in conflict. We're not in conflict yet, but like, but I want to show why I'm doing this, not because we're in conflict, but because I'm trying to understand. And so it sounds like you're saying that we all have this like instinct to conform to our group, like to get along, right? To be in the pack, right? And so that's a difficult thing to overcome or override. But sometimes there can be just one person within the group who's like, actually, I see it totally differently. And then it opens up a space for a little more of that. Is that what you're saying?
yeah, and like that in and of itself could create more conflict.
Uh-huh.
I feel like that's okay.
Yeah. So it kind of normalizes like healthy conflict. So I love this. And it's not inarticulate. And you need to stop saying that you're inarticulate.
Yes.
I'm fact checking you. But I think you're right. And there's something very subtle there about like how it's hard for us to break with our group. And there is a tendency to just kind of stifle anything we're thinking that doesn't fit. But if you have the courage and the experience and maybe the training to do that, you make it safer for everyone else. And so that's a big deal.
It creates that other, like, okay, let's go with this pack now.
Yes. The way to create, right now we are locked in high conflict with each other as a country. And a big reason for that is that we don't have another way. There's not a third pack.
Okay. Someone needs to form.
So yes. So there are other packs out there, and I'm going to tell you about a few. But like the more we can do that in our communities and in our companies and in our churches and our synagogues, whatever, like the better it's going to go. Because you cannot do this stuff alone. That's to your point. It's just counter to our DNA. So for me, it's been very helpful to create a new group just in my own little world of people who are not traditional journalists, who are not super partisan on the left or right, but are trying to interrupt all of this. It feels much better to have that comfort of knowing I'm not alone.
And like we can't ignore what's going on, but we can like help each other find ways to kind of like
Exactly.
fight enough, like defy it.
Yes, and we can share ideas and share stories, which I think are the most powerful currency. But So there's a group called Builders, which you can follow on Instagram. They do probably the best depolarizing Instagram content I've seen at all, ever. And not that it's a super crowded market, but it's really good. And they were started by the guy who does, the Kind bars that you can buy. That's good. That guy is very, very passionate about the threat of polarization. So I recommend them. And then also Braver Angels. Has anybody ever done a Braver Angels workshop? So they have like chapters around the country where you can have a sort of like organized, healthy debates and talk across the political divide. So there are these groups, right? There's interfaith groups that do this very well. I have a long history of doing that. There's interracial dialogue groups that do this very well. So those groups are out there, right? And some of them are better than others, but it's like the more we can tell stories about them, I think, as journalists, and the more we can share and create our own third way, then the better this is going to go. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. It was a great TED Talk.
Yeah, I'm totally buying it. Got a question?
I think
Are we done?
No. I was just going to say, though, I think the sort of wrap up that I was thinking of, not the wrap up, but to what we were talking about, it's sort of the 3 C's of conflict, right? You need the communication, you need the curiosity, and you need the courage. So I think those are sort of the 3 things you really need to get through.
And maybe the camaraderie.
Yeah.
Is there
Yes.
4? Do we have room for 4?
Yeah, we have room for 4. I love 4 C's. All right. Sorry.
I'm only on chapter 3. First of all, thank you so much. This is awesome. And I'm enjoying the book so much. One of the lines that really stuck with me is early on when you said, I think it was in the Gary part, that for people, being understood is more important than money, success, power, just that basic need to feel heard and understood. So we touched on it a little bit with the listening techniques, but is there anything else that you would want to share with us about how do you make someone feel understood? On a group level, but even just one-on-one.
Yeah. Yeah, so the question was, if we know that what people need most of all is to feel understood, how do we do that? One-on-one or as a group? So the looping for understanding tactic, which is something that Gary trained us on, and now we've trained 3,000 people to do, and it's incredibly fun. And we now have created a looping AI tool, which I was very skeptical about, but it is actually incredibly good at coaching people on looping. So the number one way people feel that you're trying to understand them, you don't even have to fully understand them. You just have to look like you're trying to understand them. And that goes a very long way. I mean, it's sad how far it goes because people very rarely feel that. So the number one way people feel like you're really listening to them and trying to understand them is through your words. It's not just your expression or your tone or all those things matter, but it's your words because you can't fake that. So if I take what you say and I try to distill it into my own language, the most elegant language I can come up with, I play it back to you and I ask if I've got it right. It's amazing how it shifts. I now use that technique every day. I use it in every interview, every conversation with friends where they're upset or there's any heat to the conversation. I use it as a parent with my kid. I mean, it's just, all of a sudden they say different things because now they're like, oh, you're actually trying to get me. And they start listening to themselves. And they'll be like, well, actually, I know I said that, but what I really meant was, and it becomes a collaborative process, right? It's wild. So I highly recommend, if you haven't gotten any training in listening, it is really a game changer. Yeah.
I read something a couple of weeks ago and it really stuck with me. It said the 3 sweetest words in the English language are, tell me more, right? Just tell me more. And it just, people feel heard. They feel like you really want to learn more about them. And I'm like, just sticks with me. Sorry, I think we had one more.
Say, to that point, in the book you talked about that looping exercise with one of the musicians, I think. And what I thought was really fascinating was in reflecting back those, whatever the person had said about why did you get involved in music? Oh, so what I heard you say is it was because of this. And then not only, like you said, they say different things, the person got that right, but then she said, no, actually that's not why I'm involved, which is so interesting because it also speaks to the point that you made about being curious because we think we know what they are going to say.
Yes.
We think we know what we know, and then we think we know.
Yes. It's always amazing to me when I get it wrong, which is like half the time. I realize I'm making all these assumptions I didn't even consciously realize. But you're talking about in the book, I talk about the San Francisco Symphony went on strike and they were just missing concert after concert. And like a lot of high conflicts, everyone was suffering to different degrees. And Gary went in there and helped mediate. And one of the things they did was train them to do the looping technique so that they could actually hear each other. And when you do that, you find that sometimes you get it wrong, but people are just delighted that you're trying. And then they add to it. And you just keep doing that loop until you get it right. Yeah.
I feel like this looping and conflict resolution is a form of empathy training.
Mm-hmm. You said it feels like it's a form of empathy training, all of this, yeah.
And I think it should be taught in our curriculum.
Yeah, I sure wish I had learned it a little earlier, personally. But it is, I actually think kids, it would be easier to teach kids. I mean, I'm curious what you think, but I feel like kids, like, in some ways, kids already do some of this. Like, kids have a lot of conflict resolution skills, yeah.
We sort of unlearn them.
They have more opportunity to build relationship and community first, which is really part of the building ground for than working through conflict. So if you have that 5-to-1 ratio of positive interactions to negative interactions, when you have a classroom community and a restaurant.
Right.
Building those relationships.
Right, like a strong classroom has all kinds of conflict traditions in it, right? Like conflict management, right? Like, I remember seeing like my kid getting in a fight on the soccer field when he was like 7, and like I was thinking, should I intervene? Should I not? And then all of a sudden they did rock, paper, scissors, and they did it so fast that you almost couldn't see what was happening. And then it was just done. Like whoever won, and they moved on. Like it was an amazing thing, So, but I do think the listening, like these things, as kids get older, would be helpful to be more. And you can make it fun. I mean, that's all we do. We try to make it really fun. Because if you're going to talk about conflict, it's got to be fun. Like, come on.
Or rock, paper, scissors.
Exactly. Yeah.
The Kingdom of Denmark is decidedly less diverse than we are. But observing firsthand or through an agent how they educate in the preschool and the early elementary, I think is instructive. There's built into the system the lack of exclusion of any member of the class. Any birthday party is required to invite everyone from the class. Sometimes they combine multiple classes and everybody participates. The system divides the children in a given class into some component, and they then follow a pattern of visiting in these 4 or 5 kid groups, everybody's house. And it's the responsibility of the parent to provide snacks, diversions, and physical activities. And the groups rotate so that by the end of the year, all of the kids know all of the families and they know all of each other in these less than specific educational formalities. And the whole point to all of this, as far as we can see, is to develop a sense of unity and a sense of collaboration and an understanding of the other kids. And whether or not it persists into the higher elementaries, I don't know yet. But I was very impressed at how this truly does the job.
That's a great example of building community systematically and involving families in that process. Yeah. Thank you.
I think we're at time. Yeah. Amanda, thank you so much for being here. You're amazing. Really amazing. Oh, thank you.